Carnage 83 on NBC. Battle of the Network shows. Join Rick Brooks and Mike Kogel as they explore the TV of the 70s and 80s through hand-picked episodes of their favorite and not-so-favorite series.
Welcome to Battle of the Network shows. I'm Mike.
And I'm Rick. Hello, everyone.
And today we're doing a very special episode.
I'd like to think it'll be a special episode.
Yeah, and this was your idea, so I'm going to let you pitch it to the
Anytime
folks.
I hear that, I know the pressure's on. I guess there were several things that sort of instigated this. It's the 40th anniversary this year of the 1983 television season and 83-84 season. And before we focused in, I think it was the 81-82 season. But I thought it'd be interesting to kind of zero in even a little bit closer and sort of examine the season through one network in particular. That network, NBC, one of our favorite networks in the 80s, but an entity that failed in spectacular fashion in this particular fall. So they had 9 new shows and none of them made it. Most of them were gone by the end of the calendar year. And we'd also had, which we'll get to a little bit later, one of our friends, Gino, from our Facebook group, had talked about the show Jennifer Slept Here, which is one of these series. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I don't know if we'll do a whole episode on Jennifer Slept Here, but I think it's interesting because it's an example of, okay, maybe everything wasn't all bad in this new fall season. And it's an interesting transition period too, Mike, because we're coming from like the dark years of NBC that we've talked about many times in the podcast. But right now at this time, in the fall of 83, they're right in the cusp of breaking through.
Right. They've got a couple hits, right?
Yeah.
Or sort of hit, or critical hits.
Right.
Hill Street, Cheers.
Mm-hmm. St. Elsewhere was new.
Of course, Facts of Life was still around.
Yeah.
Different Strokes was still
Different
around.
Strokes was still around. Real People was still around. Yeah. A few things. Little House on the Prairie had just been like canned, I think, the previous year. Was its last. And of course, right around the corner, next season, they would have Cosby Show and Miami Vice.
And they already had the A-Team, too.
Yeah, that's the big thing, yes, which debuted in January after the Super Bowl and became like a massive hit.
And Knight Rider.
Yeah, Knight Rider was there too. So they had some pieces. And minor hit Remington Steele, which sort of like, I guess, would coast on the strength of other shows. But, in order to get hits, you sort of need hits.
Right.
So you can build a schedule. But NBC's problem was, it didn't have hits and nothing was working. Fred Silverman was gone. Mm-hmm. Grant Tinker was kind of like the big poobah. Grant Tinker of Mary Tyler Moore Productions. Yeah. It kind of built that up with Mary Tyler Moore. And now running NBC with Brennan Tartikoff in charge of programming. And Fred Silverman is still around, though, as a producer.
Yes.
And, he one of these shows that we're going to talk about. Uh-huh. So I thought it would kind of be interesting to maybe give a little context, talk about the TV season and NBC's role in it, where it came from, and then maybe we could share some thoughts on these actual individual series.
Okay.
One thing also, I want to give props to this outstanding book I read called The Sweeps. And it was written like I think it came out in 1984, just after the development for the 83-84 season. And it talks about all aspects of television. I'd never heard of this book before. And I stumbled upon it when I was doing research and thought, I got to get a copy of the book, read it, and I highly recommend it. It talks about, like, Brennan Tartikoff is interviewed. Many of the people that produced the shows are interviewed. Ted Danson features prominently in it. Harry Anderson. We didn't mention Night Court. Night Court would debut January 1984. Mm-hmm. And it was considered for the fall, though, but it was a bubble show. Nobody was really sure if it would make it or not. And Harry Anderson is, at the time, like kind of a working stage, comedian magician and doing spots on Saturday Night Live, but not sure where his career is going to go. Yeah. Not making a whole lot of money. And so he was really counting on, Night Court getting picked up.
So they chose to wait on Night Court.
Yes.
In lieu of, we'll just say, Mr. Smith.
Yeah. I think it might have been like We Got It Made, but it was one of those, it was kind of on the bubble, and they had eventually decided to hold it back as a mid-season show.
Yeah. Maybe that was to its benefit.
Yeah. I think it might have been, actually. And we talked about Night Court earlier this season.
Yeah.
And that series took a while to find its footing, even after being delayed a little bit. So
right.
But one thing, there was a couple things like in affecting like the television landscape in general was the encroachment of cable, and that's kind of a theme throughout the sweeps as they talk to like executives and is networks, the broadcast networks suddenly being aware that cable's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like MTV was becoming a thing. Friday Night Videos, I think, had just started like in summer of 1983, something like that, kind of trying to imitate, but ABC, CBS, and NBC were losing. This is the year that they were starting to lose ratings to cable, and it was like, oh hey, they're actually going to spend money on programming. One thing that was interesting was Showtime started showing The Paper Chase in like spring of 1983, which a few years before had been on CBS. Wasn't a huge hit, but Showtime picking it up and sort of treating it as a prestige show was a sign that, oh hey, they're not going to just put on old movies, they're actually going to spend money on original, quality programming.
Right.
And something else that I didn't remember this, but Headline News was relatively new, sort of a spinoff of CNN, and it was actually offered to affiliates around the country. So like if you're an NBC affiliate and you've got a hole in your schedule or something, they could pick up Headline News and run it for like an hour or two, like even during the day or stuff.
Yeah.
Which NBC didn't really like this, but the affiliates could do it, and the affiliates were getting increasingly restless because, especially the NBC affiliates, because the ratings were going down. Every piece of NBC was like losing. The only place that they were winning was Saturday morning, I guess because of the Smurfs was a big part of it. But everything else, daytime was doing very poorly. Surprisingly, I had to look this one up. The one thing that the book doesn't really get into, Mike, is late night. And you'd think, NBC must have been dominating late night because they had Saturday Night Live, they had Friday Night Videos, they had
Night Show,
David Letterman, and Johnny Carson. Yeah. Well, it turns out this season that we're going to talk about, 83 to 84, CBS became like the first network to win, like for the season they won primetime, daytime, evening news, and late night. So NBC wasn't even winning late night, and the reason was Johnny Carson was still number one, but David Letterman was losing to basically would be like the second hour of CBS's late night movie, whatever they called it. So a lot of times that would be like reruns of Quincy or Heart to Heart or Mannix or something like that would be beating David Letterman pretty soundly. And Saturday Night Live was still, I think, in the Dick Ebersol years before Lorne Michaels coming back. So NBC was just not doing well. Now, a couple things that were in their favor was they had really good demographics. They were young and upscale. And a fascinating thing about the books is you start to see people talking a little bit about demographics. And it was this time, it was becoming more prevalent. People saying, hey, total viewers don't really matter. What matters is matching a show with an audience. And NBC was doing it because they had to. But they were like touting, okay, we got younger viewers, more upscale viewers, especially on shows like Cheers and St. Elsewhere. So that was something they had. Now, the A-Team was just a huge hit. I mean, they gave them something to build around. But just for a little perspective too, like, so the season before, 82, 83 season, CBS was number one. They had shows like Dallas, 60 Minutes, MASH, Magnum PI. ABC was number two, Dynasty, Monday Night Football, Three's Company. NBC was way back at number three. But, like we talked about, they had added shows like Cheers, Family Ties, St. Elsewhere. So they had stuff in the works. And then in May 1983, they scored big with a very popular miniseries. And you guess what that was? Yep, V. So that did very well. So they had a little bit of momentum. And in the summer of 83, before the season, they actually won like a sweeps. I think it was one of the, not as important ones, maybe like the July sweeps or something. And the Emmy nominations came out, and they dominated the Emmy nominations. And they would actually go on to do very well with Hill Street Blues. Ted Danson didn't win, but Judd Hirsch won. But the book actually makes it sound like the media went up to Ted Danson and almost treated him like the winner because Judd Hirsch was kind of obnoxious with his acceptance speech. Because Taxi had just been canceled by NBC.
Yeah, he should have been.
You're right. So the affiliates were getting antsy, but there was some momentum, some reason to be positive. And the head of promotion from CBS came over, Steve Sommer, I think, and it started this Be There campaign, which we talked about on our network campaign shows. We talked about the Let's All Be There. This was the genesis of it, the Be There. I think we watched a bunch of these, right?
Yeah. So Rick made a little YouTube playlist for both of us, but it was very helpful to me, especially. And I think the best thing in it was this. It was broken up in two parts, but it was that guy, right, that you just mentioned, promoting the Be There campaign to the affiliates.
Right.
And I mean, when it first started, I was like, because he's on a all beige set and he's wearing a beige suit and and he's just sitting there and I'm like, oh boy, this is gonna be. And then it turned into just fascinating. He's smoking a cigar. Yeah. And he's laying out this whole campaign, which, not that I know a lot about it, but it sounds like what all the networks started doing, which is giving the affiliates all the materials they needed and even recording versions of the songs for them. And I think the affiliates were still editing the video together, but they had animation and they could get their logo animated to be their animation. And he's explaining all this. Just, he seems like very low key arrogant about it.
Yes. That's a perfect way of describing it. There's like a confidence and arrogance, but the confidence really comes through because he's not like really raising his voice.
No.
It's not, instead of being like a pitch man, he's just being like confident. He's laying out. He's like, this is what we're gonna do. This is what your part. We're gonna have this for you. You can choose this. And I guess they released materials and just told everybody wait until I think it was like the Emmys or something.
Yeah.
Or
They had certain dates.
Yeah. They didn't want everybody to just start doing it. And
Right.
But they had a timeline, and it seemed like it was very well planned. And one thing that they did that was a little bit unconventional at the time was they would actually refer to other networks and other shows in their promos. So you would have like Mr. T like saying, "Hey, Magnum's a wimp," watch Mr. T and stuff like that.
Right, and one of the campaigns was showing like the childhoods of various characters. And
Oh yeah.
be like, well, you couldn't be there when Mr. T. They show it's just some little kid with a fake mohawk, and then
Yeah.
but you can be there when he does this or whatever, and of course he'd be there, fools, or something like that. And I don't think he says fools, but he.
It was like creating a sense of urgency, like and connection with the audience. Like you couldn't be there when Rick and Mike were showing up half asleep at the playground the next day because they had stayed up to watch David Letterman.
Right.
But you can be there on Battle of the Network shows.
Yeah.
And they talk about it.
Yeah, there was one with Mr. T, one with Belker from Hill Street Blues.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And both of those, they're like in the promo. They filmed things, and then there's a Knight Rider one. And other than saying "be there," clearly David Hasselhoff wasn't involved. Kit was involved,
Right.
jumping over a garbage truck or something.
Yeah. Those were cool, and they're very cheesy, but they're fun to watch. But the whole "Be There" campaign, and one thing you see about like the marketing for this season was just how reliant they were on A-Team.
Yeah.
And just really like, okay, that was their flagship show, which was interesting because the other thing is Grant Tinker had built his name up on quality television.
Yeah.
That's what NBC was going for.
Right.
A-Team comes out, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we need to build around this. But you can see they were hedging a little bit. They're like, okay, we need hits,
Yeah.
We need to give the people what they want. We don't want to give up on quality, but they were also, and some of their messaging to the affiliates, they're saying, we're going to have popular shows and we're going to build on this, and A-Team will lift Remington Steele. But they were very reliant on A-Team carrying the network, which I guess it sort of did, but obviously that wasn't the show that really turned it around.
Right. We'll get into this more, but you can just feel that influence in like just the nature of all these shows.
Yeah.
Not that they're all the A-Team, but
Right.
there's an element. You can see it's influencing it, and the fact, I mean, that guy mentioned V very prominently in that promo thing. That seemed another clue to what they were going for.
Yeah,
which is high concept.
Right. When mass appeal hits, and they were kind of like, okay, we're not going to rely solely on quality, and I think they kind of took some lumps from it because they had kind of touted it. But this has been a couple years, and you don't stay around too long in your position unless you start giving results.
Right.
The affiliates, they wanted results, and they weren't really getting it.
Yeah.
So one thing that would happen is, I guess, let me give some spoilers here. So I already said CBS wound up winning the season, and they dominated. But one thing that was interesting was all the networks were all the networks were down in prime time, and NBC's season rating was the lowest in 25 years. This is like according to a UPI article I read. So this was reported then, and I think ABC was the one that was touting that fact that hey, NBC's ratings are the lowest in 25 years. But then I think NBC countered by pointing out that the lower right ones from 25 years ago, that was ABC. So there was some gamesmanship there, and like I said, NBC still won Saturday mornings, and the top morning news program was Good Morning America. That very prestigious early morning slot. So
yeah,
that was just that was some stuff going on,
but I bet NBC was second place
with Today's Show.
Yeah.
I don't know
if CBS was trying yet then.
I think it took like 20 years for them to come up with
At least
some stability in that.
They're still working on it.
Before we get into like the actual shows that NBC unveiled, I wanted to mention some of the shows that were on the other networks to point out, to be fair, you're going to see these are not all like smash hits, and some of them are notorious flops, like some of the ones we're going to talk about on NBC. CBS, the new programs in the fall schedule, they had Aftermash right there, okay? Emerald Point NAS, like a military kind of soap with Dennis Weaver. Scarecrow and Mrs. King, now that one worked out well. The Mississippi, which I think it started a little bit earlier, like Ralph Waite is like a riverboat traveling lawyer. He like retired from his law firm and just went down the Mississippi solving crimes, apparently.
What Mike wants to see.
Yes. It's funny because I've come across like a lot of promos on YouTube for that particular show, but I've never seen a full episode of it. But that was what Ralph Waite did after the Waltons.
Yeah.
Whiz Kids. if you remember that one. And Cutter to Houston, which is like a medical show. I think that's the one with the Shelley Hack who was in that. And maybe a young Alec Baldwin, I think. But I could be mixing that up with another one that we'll get to in a minute. And Goodnight Beantown, which I think it started a little bit earlier with Bill Bixby and Marriott Hartley. ABC, okay, Hotel. Now that worked. That was a big hit right out of the gate. Oh, Madeline with Madeline Kahn, sitcom that did not work. Just Our Luck, show about a genie, a black genie working for a white man, which actually caused protests from like the NAACP before it premiered, which is interesting because as this book reveals, it was like co-created by an African-American guy who was working as a lowly production assistant on Cheers.
Yeah.
After, leaving a very well-paying and promising white-collar job, he just took spots on the bottom rung just to try to get into television. Let's see what else we have. Okay, Trauma Center, another medical show. It's Not Easy, sitcom with Ken Howard and Bert Convy, which, how could that not work, right?
Right, yeah.
Lottery, an anthology show about, lottery winners and kind of how it changes them. Hardcastle and McCormick, which we've covered on the podcast, another Stephen J. Cannell show. And this is the one I want to mention, one more show here. I was looking through the TV Guide fall preview, which I have right here for this season, and they have like their editor's favorites, and the one show that they seem to be like highest about, not just as being successful, but they actually were, thought it was a really good show, Webster.
Oh, really?
Yes. For some reason, like it's one of their editor's choice, like their highlights, Webster, and they found it delightful, I guess.
Wow.
At least from what they saw.
That was successful for a while.
Yeah. So, Webster was, so it wasn't all bad, but, there were a lot of flops in the other networks too.
Yeah.
But there was a lot going on.
Right.
So that's where we are. So then NBC into this environment brought 9 shows. only one of them would last more than like 13 episodes. I mean, that's pretty bad.
They must have had a commitment.
Yeah. I mean, some of them, at least one of them didn't even last. Wow, one of them didn't even last 13 episodes. Now I have one more thing I'd like to read, if I may.
Okay.
This is Brendan Tartikoff talking to the affiliates and he's kind of doing a rundown, and I thought this might be a good way to introduce the slate, and then we can talk about them if that sounds good to you. So, right, so this is him just walking the audience through the schedule. It says here, this is from the sweeps, night by night. Okay, so here's their programming and what they're looking at with this schedule. He says, on Mondays, Boone would work because it was a family show, and 8 o'clock on Monday was the ultimate family slot. Boone. Strengthening the Walton's flavored family appeal would be Elvis Mania. The audience would flow perfectly into the movie that followed it and wipe out after MASH, which he said is simply not MASH. He's right about that.
Yeah.
Tuesday night would still be A-Team night, and the well-plotted Remington Steele would become less plotted in order to capitalize on the presumably non-thinking A-Team watchers.
Oh, wow.
Now, that's not a direct quote, but this is the author's interpretation. The male-female Remington audience, he said, would flow into Bay City Blues, a pansexual show with a great writing staff.
Pansexual?
So there's our second new show, Bay City Blues. Wednesday night would be ladies' night. Real people would pull in the women and kids while the men watched Aaron Spelling's The Fall Guy on ABC. Then would come the frilly comedy The Facts of Life, followed by the intelligent domestic character comedy Family Ties, both of which had strong female appeal. Last, St. Elsewhere would try to show why 20,000 viewers, many of them women, liked it enough to send in letters clamoring for its renewal. Thursday night would be Demographic night.
So this is all the author's words, right?
Yes, this is the author's summary of what Tartikoff is saying.
Yeah.
Cheers and Hill Street had the most affluent young audiences of any shows on television. NBC was inordinately proud of its program's demographics, its consolation prize, and a low-rated schedule. We Got It Made would be Cheers' new lead-in, and Tartikoff told the affiliates that for this addition to American culture, they could thank Fred Silverman, quote, whose singular vision put Three's Company on the air, end quote. A compliment that could be taken at face value only at a TV affiliates convention. Friday night would be all white. Now, I should say that means white, meaning not the color of the performers, but on a TV board, white means a new show.
Okay.
It would feature 3 new shows, a strategy that had worked rather well the previous year. Mr. Smith could become an explosion, said Tartikoff, pulling in the kids who like monkey shows and the adults who actually listen to a program's words. Mr. Smith came from Paramount, Tartikoff reminded the audience, which had given the network our best comedies, Family Ties, Cheers, and Taxi, all quality shows. The audience flow to Jennifer Slept Here could be enough to make that show a hit, he said, particularly since Jennifer was the, quote, highest testing comedy concept we had this year, end quote. Friday would also include Love and Honor, which tested with high teen appeal, and Manimal from Glenn Larson, who theoretically could do no wrong with an action show. Well, we'll find out there's a lot of difference between theory and practice, right? Saturday would be highlighted by The Yellow Rose, which had, quote, the best cast ever assembled for this kind of television show, end quote, and The Rousters from Steve Cannell, quote, the man who gave us the A-Team, end quote. Invoking the name A-Team was explanation enough for the affiliates. Finally, on Sunday, Monitor would be rechristened First Camera. This was their news magazine show.
Right.
Would hire some hotshot investigative journalists and would go head-to-head against 60 Minutes, hoping to capitalize on viewer disaffection from that smugly successful show, which was by now as much giant as Giant Killer, an image reinforced by the ongoing libel trial. We might have talked about that. That was
With
Dan
the
Rather, I think.
Westmoreland?
Yeah, with 60 Minutes was experiencing some legal trouble. So by the end of the presentation, the consensus of the room, judging from applause, was that young Brennan had cooked up a heck of a battle plan. Program compatibility, audience flow, quality, high concepts, hooks, heat, sex, violence. Quote, we've got a shot next year, end quote, he concluded. Look at our shows. They can be distinctive, competitive, and commercial. I looked across the street, and I don't see anything that's innovative or intimidating. And then he says, hey, we're working, we're building for the future, and kind of tries to give them some cause for optimism. That's how the head programmer was selling this lineup to the affiliates. So then, the question would naturally be, what are these new shows?
Well, yeah, you did mention some of them, but see if I can remember them.
Yeah, okay, this will be impressive. There's 9 total.
I'm going to try to go in the order since you said during the days, but I already forgot if anything was on Monday. Anything new on Monday?
I believe...
the Boone.
Yes, Boone.
Which is set in the 50s.
Yeah.
A kid wants to play rock and roll instead of doing whatever the family does.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
A family drama, I
Yes.
guess.
Tuesday was Bay City Blues.
Tuesday is Bay City Blues,
Which
yes.
is a baseball drama from Bochco.
Yep.
That we've mentioned that before.
Right.
And Wednesday, I don't remember anything on Wednesday.
Wednesday was wait a minute. Thursday was demographics night.
Yes. Wednesday was, I feel like everything's backloaded.
Yes, because remember, I don't have the schedule in front of me, so I'm not remembering by the date now.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well, we're going to skip Wednesday. Thursday had We Got It Made.
that's right.
I've already lost count. Boone, Bay City Blues, We Got It Made.
Yeah, there was nothing, NBC didn't have anything new on Wednesday night.
Okay, good.
They didn't want to tamper with the juggernaut led by real people.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Friday was all new.
Yeah,
You got Mr. Smith.
that's correct.
That is the orangutan show. You got Jennifer Slept Here.
Correct?
You got For Love and Honor. Is that what
Yeah.
it's called? And Manimal.
That's correct, yes. And
Was Manimal on at 10?
you got it in the right order, except Manimal was 9, and
Okay.
For Love and Honor was
Yes.
10 o'clock.
Right. Okay. And then Saturday was Rousters and Yellow Rose. And Sunday was First Camera.
Yes. And Saturday also had Different Strokes and Silver Spoons returning to lead off the night. Yeah, and Knight Rider was on Sundays, and they had movie nights on Sundays and Mondays, kind of filling out their schedule a little bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's pretty good, Mike.
Okay.
You named them all.
Yeah.
Now, so some of these series are harder to find than others. Like there were some of them that I just couldn't find any full episodes of.
Right.
Including, I don't know. How do you want to? How would you like to go about this?
Well, okay. I
Would you
can
like to
tell
talk
you
about the individual?
For Love and Honor, didn't see that.
Yeah, I couldn't find it, and that's another one that TV Guide was actually pretty high on.
Yeah.
Even though it seemed to me very derivative, and at the time,
Looked very sudsy.
yeah, at the time it's like they're doing Officer and a Gentleman
Yeah.
on TV or whatever. But had Rachel Ticotin, and I think like the book gives the sense that like the show is going to be built around her, like a young female, like trying to make it in a male-dominated military environment. But like the contemporary promotions for it that we've seen, like some clips, make it seem more of like an ensemble thing. So
Yeah.
and pretty soapy.
And Boone, I didn't, other than a promo.
Yeah, Boone.
Yeah, I don't remember those shows at all.
I did not remember Boone at all. Yeah, not with the other one either. And like we
What-
mentioned, Dallas and Dynasty were very big, so
Yeah.
anything with soap elements they're going to give it a try.
Was there Elvis Mania at the time?
1983, I don't think so. and actually, I think some of the feeling was that they kind of hedged their bets and didn't really go as far as they should have on it. And I have a post-mortem from somebody at NBC that I can read later.
Okay.
Where I think he says basically it wasn't raw enough. Like by doing a family show about this, they took away like the dangerous elements of rock and roll that made it so
Yeah.
successful in the first place. And
Yeah.
that there was an inherent conflict that they should have seen.
Right. Which I wonder if that American Dreams show suffered that too.
Yeah. Now was that was like devoted to or built around Bandstand?
Yeah.
Or old clip. Okay. So like 50s,
Not as
60s.
dangerous.
Yeah, that's true.
I'd like to talk about a few of the shows. I mean, not in detail, but I think Bay City Blues is worth talking about a little bit for the kind of what is pretty clearly not working about it.
Yeah.
Mr. Smith, I think we have to address that.
Yeah.
Jennifer Slept Here, We Got It Made, I think is worth also talking about what's not working there.
Yeah.
And Rousters, and I only watched half an episode of Yellow Rose, but
Yeah.
that looked a lot better than I thought it would.
Yeah, Yellow Rose was actually on the late lamented Warner Archive Instant streaming service. They put the whole run up there, and I watched, I think, maybe 1 or 2 episodes on there, and now I can only see like incomplete episodes.
Yeah.
But
I mean, it does have a good cast.
it does.
And in one of these shows we watched, there was like an audio promo for Yellow Rose that sounded like a ridiculous episode. But like the half I saw, which was in your playlist, was the pilot, and it seemed like it had a different energy than Dallas or any of those shows. Like maybe I was not watching it at regular speed, but it still seemed to have like a kind of a loose energy about it, like maybe a more Botchko kind of energy.
It's very fast moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and Sybil Shepherd seemed really good, and I mean Sam Elliott and
David Soul,
Noah Beery.
Yeah, it's an interesting
Boomer.
cast.
From Battlestar.
Yeah,
Edward Albert Jr.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I found it just didn't make it for me.
Yeah,
like I was trying to think of it in terms of like, would I be interested in watching more of this? And it didn't really hook me.
Yeah, I don't know about that,
but it did have an interesting cast, and you're totally right. It looks to me like, okay, this is an attempt to create a nighttime soap that's going to catch on, of course. But you can't. I wouldn't sit there and say, oh, this is a ripoff of Dallas.
No.
You know, it's set in like a Western environment. Other than that, it's actually like digging more into like the ranch aspects, which at this time of Dallas, I think Dallas was probably focusing more on like upper class and more like dynasty kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's like a struggling ranch.
Yeah,
there's a Ewing type character, Chuck Connors, I think.
Yeah,
who wasn't in the part that I saw, but who's interested, I think, in drilling oil on their land, but.
Not the focus of the show, more of like somebody for the other characters to react to.
Yeah, it's a much dustier show.
Yeah. Yellow Rose was the one of these that lasted the longest. It actually got 22 episodes.
Okay.
Well, We Got It Made actually was the longest, but that's a special case.
Yeah.
You know, which we can talk about that in a minute.
And I mean, did Rousters get it?
Rousters.
I know it got kind of burned off at the end.
Yeah, Rousters was 12 episodes.
Okay.
Just didn't make it.
Yeah. So maybe we can start with that, even though it's
Rousters?
the end of the week. I mean, we already talked about Yellow Rose. So
yeah, I did watch a full episode of Rousters.
Yes, I watched. I think it was the pilot, and I think I may have seen that as a kid. But Stephen J. Cannell, my suspicion is that much like Mr. T, NBC saw Jim Varney was succeeding, signed a contract with him, and asked Stephen J. Cannell to make a show that could fit Jim Varney and also feel like the A-Team. But Jim Varney's he's just doing what he's doing, Ernest, in a more dramatic setting. He's not quite he's a genius instead of a dummy. But you know, it's Chad Everett and him and some other people, and like conceptually, it's just not as clean as the A-Team or.
Yeah.
Like it's got one too many pieces.
Yeah.
They're carnies.
Right.
They're bounty hunters. Okay, there's a show.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of the Fall Guy, but
right.
And they're the descendants of Wyatt Earp, and Chad Everett's named Wyatt Earp.
Yeah.
And it's just too much.
I
kind of like the that he's. I guess he's not just a rouster for the carnival. He's a rouster for life. He's out there
yes.
helping people out,
right?
But he's just managing chaos, which reminded me of that
description.
Josh Brolin's role in Hail Caesar,
where
he's I don't know if you.
I've not seen that.
He's like the fixer at a movie studio.
Okay.
So he's just he's managing like 10 problems at once,
mm-hmm.
and so some of that worked, but at the end of the day, it's Stephen J. Cannell show. It's guns and fist fights and
I made it in car chases. I made a deliberate choice not to watch the pilot.
Okay.
But I watched like an episode, like the third or fourth episode.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like watching it, and I had read about the development of it, but I was kind of thinking like, what's the setting and like why are they? Is this it's a carnival, but they have got a home base here in like Los Angeles.
It seems like it, yeah.
It wasn't. There was some confusion there. I think I'm going to check your theory. I think it's a good theory. I'm not sure that they actually built the show around Jim Varney. But I do think that they probably intended for him to be the breakout star.
Yeah.
I think it was more like
the Ernest stuff was already in advertising was well underway by then. So
and by the way, as far as like finding stuff, let's give thanks to Jim Varney fans because I believe it's a Jim Varney fan that put all these episodes on YouTube. I think it's like Varney's videos is the one that posted all these. So
yeah. Now I'll say this about the pilot too.
Mm-hmm.
Cannell brought in as many ringers as he could as guest star.
Oh yeah,
Robert Davi.
Wow.
Fred Dreyer.
Yeah. Whoa.
Well, Hoyt Axton, I think, is a semi-regular.
Yeah, he's in the episode I saw, but not hardly at all.
Oh yeah, and
criminally underused.
Mimi Rogers is the female lead.
Yeah. Wow. That kind of surprised me.
And Tackleberry.
Wow. Nice.
I think there might have been a couple other people too.
Yeah.
Just like wow. And they were just all like his tackle. Sorry, I forgot his name.
David Graff.
Yeah. His role is very small.
Okay.
Another guy who looks very familiar, playing like rednecky kind of guys on Cannell shows.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was okay.
I'm surprised G.W. Bailey wasn't on one of these episodes.
So yeah. He would have fit right in.
Yeah. Yeah, the episode I saw was, you could see what they're going for. But again, here's the thing, too, is like, we're watching early episodes. It's possible this show could have found, like, what it was going for.
Right.
But it did look to me like, oh, man, they're definitely trying to get this A-Team formula again. Just from the theme song.
Yeah.
You just got
Mike
Mike
Post,
Post
yeah, of
music. And it's like, kind of like, even the lyrics are like being tough or something. I forget what it was, but it just got that same kind of like vibe to it. And in the credits, I know in the end credits of the episode, they're showing like a highlight of the car crashes and chases from the episode, and with, and freeze framing it.
Yeah.
The one element I did not like was, I think her name Maxine Stewart playing Wyatt's their mother, playing, I think she was in her early 60s because I looked up, and playing a little bit older.
Like 100.
Yeah. But
I mean, I know Wyatt Earp, lived into, the 1920s or 30s, right?
Yeah, he lived.
And I forget the dates of the OK Corral. But at one point in the pilot, there are a couple confusing things. One, Wyatt Earp is supposedly Chad Everett and Jim Varney's grandfather. But she is Wyatt Earp's sister-in-law. Their mother is Wyatt Earp's sister-in-law.
Yeah, I don't get that.
Wouldn't that make him their uncle or something?
And I could have sworn...
It's really confusing.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I could have sworn that one of the things I was reading, maybe it was in the TV guide, they actually referred to the iconic Wyatt Earp as the great-grandfather. But I know in the episode I watched, they were calling him the grandfather.
He's a kid. Chad Everett is a son.
Okay, so
He's his great-grandfather.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I don't know. And she claims to have been at the shootout for the OK Corral. But she's also like there's a Wyatt, current Wyatt, is giving a speech to his son's class, which is it's like the Carney kids that Mimi Rogers teaches.
Okay, that's her role. Okay.
Her role, lion tamer, Carney teacher, and she's Whit Axon's daughter.
Everybody pitches in at the carnival.
And he's trying to give this speech about how, the difference between legends and truth. And that a lot of the things about Wyatt Earp that we believe aren't necessarily true,
Right.
That the shootout didn't even happen in the corral, that he shot a couple guys in the back, And grandma or mom, whatever, gets up there and just starts telling the tall tales. So I don't know what's true, even with that.
Yeah.
But it was confusing. I feel like, they can't totally drop that because that's the guy's name.
Yeah.
I feel like if it had developed, they would have dropped like the Carney angle.
Yeah, that's the one they could have gone.
Yeah, and just had them on the road or something.
Right. Simplify a lot of things.
Yeah.
With that. Yeah, I mean, and Chad Everett is fine.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of show where there's a lot of they're going for a lot of comic banter, and Chad Everett's getting frustrated because everybody else is wacky around him.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, oh, come on, and
that's why he's the rouster.
Yeah. He's and he's being asked to do things, and he reluctantly agrees to do it because it's the right thing to do, but he's not happy about it.
Right.
But yeah, and with a lot of car chases and shootouts and fights.
And he's the other part of this sort of A-Team formula too. Well-known leading man who's
exactly
a little bit older now.
Yep. Yeah, we of course go to the archives. Our medical center episode, we talk more about Chad.
He was a young man.
Yes. Now he's more distinguished.
Yes, in his 30s, late 30s, I guess.
Yeah, it did not work. One of my favorite books, Harry and Wally's favorite TV shows that I mentioned, they gave Rousters 2.5 stars. Yellow Rose out of 4.
Yeah.
Yellow Rose they gave 2.5 stars. By the way,
another trend.
Yeah, and speaking of 2.5 stars, do we have anything else to say about Boone? There's barely any footage of it.
Yeah.
Even the promos don't have a whole lot.
It had blanking on his name, Maurice.
Who's it?
Maurice from Northern Exposure.
Oh yeah, I did.
I can't remember his name.
Barry Corbin?
Yeah, Barry Corbin. I think he's the dad.
Okay.
That's all I know. That promo when the kid's like, I'm out of here. Whatever.
Yeah, Harry and Wally gave that 2.5 stars too. So there you go.
But again, all of these things seem a little high concept.
Yeah.
Which I think that's because the A-Team was high concept. V is high concept.
Right.
Clearly, things like Mr. Smith.
Yeah.
Manimal.
And the book takes you through the process of some other shows that didn't make it through,
Yeah.
And Night Court is an interesting contrast because it's more character driven. It was designed to be not as high concept. The most unique thing about it, the age of the judge, was actually the thing that almost scared everybody away. Because there were a lot of people skeptical about whether Harry Anderson could carry a show, which I was thinking was funny because when we talked about Night Court, I think we talked about how he didn't really need to carry the show and he wasn't expected to once it got going. But looking at the development, everybody was just focused on him as the star, as a vehicle for him.
Yeah.
And of course, it became something quite different, and the likes of John Larroquette and Marky Post became arguably more the focus than Harry Anderson did.
You look at those prestige successes that we mentioned, and all of those are pretty simple concepts.
That's right, yeah.
Cheers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can't get much simpler than
Right.
people hanging out at a bar.
Yeah.
Hill Street, I mean, it's like
Yeah.
cop show. It's more the execution of it.
Yeah.
St. Elsewhere, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Medical show, it's just the execution of it. Family Ties, family show with that little bit of a liberal conservative thing, but really it's just a family show.
Yeah. Kind of more character driven.
Yeah. And then you have Mr. Smith.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey.
Mr. Smith.
A talking orangutan.
Now, Mr. Smith is the one that really amuses me.
Which I loved as a 10-year-old.
Yeah. Like I didn't watch this at all. I remember it being mocked. It seemed like Johnny Carson was a favorite target of Johnny Carson. Right?
Probably was.
Yeah.
I think Letterman too.
Now it lasted 12 episodes, got 1.5 stars from Harry and Wally, and I did watch an episode. And what's interesting about looking at the contemporary hype in this book that came out around the same time is almost everybody was assuming it would be good just because like Ed Weinberger created it, and the guys behind like Taxi and then like sort of that Paramount crew.
Yeah.
So it had this pedigree. So they assumed that it would be quality television. And then when I watched it, though, if I didn't know it came from these guys, I would never have thought that.
No.
Like, I just didn't think there was much to it other than, okay, there's a talking chimp,
Yeah, there's the occasional, like, topical joke. But then you have sometimes a live orangutan, sometimes a pretty sophisticated-looking puppet.
Yeah.
I think voiced by Ed Weinberger.
Yes, it is.
Ed period Weinberger.
Yeah.
And Leonard Fry.
The great Leonard Fry.
Yes.
Batty Award-winning Leonard Fry.
Yeah. A family, so it's kind of a family sitcom. But Mr. Smith, there's some experiment. It's not just he talks, but he's a genius, an erudite genius.
A Robert Pine genius? Not that kind of genius.
Like the Beast from the X-Men genius.
Ah, okay. Okay,
That's a
gotcha.
good, or
Yeah.
and he's he's working for the government. The episode you put in our playlist, which I don't know if that's the one you watched, but it's the second to last episode, I think. But he finally gets outed to the public.
Yes, that is the one.
They're trying to keep him secret and hijinks. I guess not even hijinks really.
It's low key hijinks. It's like it's caught in the middle or something. I don't.
Well, I mean the fact that he talks like a New York genius.
Yeah.
He's he's low key.
Yeah.
It's just weird.
He's low energy, and like Leonard Fry, like on Best of the West,
right? He's
sort of playing more of a stooge, and like things can happen to him.
Yeah,
it's the kind of show where you'd think, okay, who's like the foil here? Is somebody going to get hit with a pie in the face or something like that? But that's not really happening.
I mean, I guess it's Don Amici.
Yeah.
Which is also
he's like
I know he was maybe not. He hadn't.
This was
had his cocoon come back yet.
Right.
It seems pretty low.
Weird for him to do what looked like essentially like a very minor part. Yeah. I didn't find much at all. I didn't think it was all that funny, and they just didn't seem to be doing a whole lot with the concept. Now I do think it's interesting that they had given up on the pretense of okay, he must be concealed from the public,
right?
Which it seemed to me was like a big essential part of the show.
Yeah. Like
sort of that tension is like okay, we can't let everybody know about this, and that was like part of the basic premise of it. So it's interesting that they were getting away from that.
I mean, it does to me. It seems like looking back that another thing a lot of these shows have in common is a sort of unsustainable element like that. Like, I mean, I don't think you could do 10 seasons of keeping him from the public.
Right.
At some point, it's like Superman and Lois Lane.
Right.
Unless you're recycling the audience, it's hard to keep that going. But you're right. Yeah, Leonard Fry should be the stooge, and he's just helping out.
Yeah, he's a little fussy,
butler / government agent, I think.
Yeah, I it just didn't really work for me.
Yeah.
But it seemed like that was one of the things that would have been considered one of the safer bets.
I wonder I can't remember because it came up when Ed Weinberger was on Gilbert Gottfried's podcast. He told a very not appropriate for this podcast story about it, but I think there may have been like the initial idea may have been more like political satire.
Yeah.
And probably it got pushed more for being for kids and lost some edge.
I can definitely believe that. I mean, you can see where they're going, like Friday night, like an early time slot, and going for kids like the 2 to 11-year-old demographic.
Yes, kids who love monkey shows.
Yeah.
And adults who love the dialogue.
Yeah. I mean, in retrospect, it's ridiculous, but I guess you can sort of see what they were thinking.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just didn't work, and yeah, it didn't last and didn't get a foothold. And after watching some of it myself, I don't lament that it didn't get more episodes.
Right. I might have it back then.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Yeah, this is of all these shows, that's the one. It's not the one I watch the most, but it's the one I remember the promotion for the most.
Oh, yeah.
Which is I'm thinking probably on Saturday mornings they were heavily promoting it.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, for Love and Honor, I don't really have anything else to say about that. That was a 2-star, serialized show. Only lasted 12 episodes.
Yeah.
Not pretty rare now, I think. So
right.
Not more to say about that.
I don't know anything about First Camera.
I mean, that's technically a renamed show, so
Yeah.
And it takes some gall to put a news magazine up against 60 Minutes, by the way.
right.
You know, and I think there's a quote in the book, somebody thinks 60 Minutes is tired or something like that. It's like, well, it was one of the most popular shows in America. You know, we talked about that in the podcast before. That seems like just a kind of giving up thing. Like, okay, we're going to do a public service show, but we're going to put it on against 60 Minutes because we're going to get destroyed there anyway.
Right. We got it made.
Okay, yeah.
Talk about another concept that I don't think could sustain itself really beyond one episode.
And from the mind of Fred Silverman.
Yes. And I know this one came up before, too, like in a TV Guide game or something.
Yes.
A long time ago. But Terry Copley, Tom Villard, no, was he in High School USA? Is that what that, was he the...
Tom Villard?
Yeah.
He
the
was
sort of spaced out guy there.
Yeah, maybe he was. He was on Square Pegs, I think, too.
Okay.
Or no, I'm sorry, that was different. That was a different actor.
Okay.
There was a different spaced out actor.
Yeah.
But actually, both of them, the other one I'm thinking of, I think Merrick Buttrick, I think they both died young, actually.
Okay.
So, you know, I'm tending to mix them up a little bit.
And Matt McCoy, the great Matt McCoy.
Yeah, he's got a very distinctive face.
Yes. He'll always be Lloyd Braun number 2.
Yeah, you're Braun number 2, yes.
But of course, he was also, right? He replaced Gutenberg in Police Academy.
Yes, and interestingly,
Silicon Valley.
He himself would be replaced on We Got It Made when it would have a future life
In syndication.
On
right?
syndication, yes, after its NBC run.
But like 5 years later?
Yeah, it came back later with the star Terry Copley and not anyone else, I guess.
Right. And Stephanie Kramer?
Yeah, young Stephanie Kramer, just before Hunter.
Right.
And it's funny because so she's like Matt McCoy's girlfriend.
Yeah.
And
Nothing against Terry Copley, but
no,
she doesn't have anything to be worried about.
yeah, I mean, to me, Stephanie Kramer is the most beautiful person on the show.
Yeah.
Like one of the most beautiful on television at the time.
Right.
But she's playing a type, and Terry Copley's playing a type.
Yeah.
And I think Bonnie Urseth is Tom Villard. So the premise is these two guys are living together in New York, and they hire a maid.
Yeah.
And Terry Copley applies.
A live-in maid.
Yes, a live-in maid.
I don't know if that was the intent. I must have been, because he's like, well, we can only pay you $75 a week.
Yeah.
Which even in 1983,
right,
you can't live off.
Right.
$75 a week.
You know, I watched a couple of episodes of this, and they don't really explain it very well. And of course, the idea is that the girlfriends are going to be outraged at this, and they're always going to be this tension.
Right.
But it's like it's really weird, and it's supposed to be this will they or won't they. It's kind of like reverse Three's Company.
Yeah. But if you have the girlfriends, and they're nice. If you have the girlfriends at all,
yeah,
then having a will they or won't they, I think, is in a sitcom is just that's unappealing right there.
Right. It's like they're
because why you wouldn't be rooting. They would have to have like terrible girlfriends.
Yeah.
And even then, you would feel weird about rooting for them one of them, and which one are you going to root for?
Yeah, and Mickey, the character Terry Copley plays, is so guileless.
Yes.
That it's hard to root against her.
Right.
She has this naivete, but smarter than she looks, of course. But they were clearly going for just like titillation just by the premise itself.
Yeah.
But they're hedging their bets by giving them regular girlfriends and ensuring that nothing's going to happen. So it's like, okay, what's going to happen? Like, how are the girls going to get mad at this, which puts them in a weird position.
Yeah. And how can you do that for multiple seasons?
Yeah.
I imagine in syndication at some point it just became, well, they got rid of the girlfriends, right? I think. And they just have neighbors.
Yes. And may I read again from the sweeps? Yes. There were some press being done, so the press conferences for promoting the new shows. And so like the producers were Gordon Farr and Lynn Farr, his wife. The director was Alan Rafkin, who had done a lot of stuff, and they were all doing it with Terry Copley, and they're all at this press conference or whatever. And so this is like an excerpt from this. "If you don't mind my saying so," began a young male reporter, "the humor in your show seems to derive from misunderstanding, which is the absolute staple of Three's Company. The stupid, the moronic, idiotic, infantile. But what do you really think?" interrupted Lynn, which got a laugh from the reporters, mostly as a tension breaker. No, protested the reporter. "I'm talking about that show. I'm sure your show is going to be completely different." That got an even bigger laugh. Another reporter asked for Terry Copley's thoughts. She stopped chewing her gum for a moment and said, Then she giggled and everyone laughed. "How did you get the role, Terry?" someone shouted. "Through my agent." She paused, then giggled. Everyone laughed again. The crucifixion, it seemed, would be amicable. And then someone said it was like a cartoon, and then Alan Rafkin, sort of talked around a little bit, but talked about, he had worked on MASH and Mary Tyler Moore and all the, quote, good shows, and said, we just do the job we know how to do. And it says Rafkin's voice was stretching tight as a wire. But everybody just assumed that this was going to be a totally, like, moronic show.
Yeah.
It was a total, ripoff of Three's Company, like, trying to get the spirit of it. And plus, I think people had knives out for Fred Silverman, too, coming back as an independent producer and getting this on the schedule. And I think a lot of people, one thing in the book that comes up is I think people assume that it was kind of a quid pro quo, or just like a favor. Silverman had a deal, like a sweetheart deal, so there was some of that. But that, if it wasn't Fred Silverman involved, the show wouldn't even be on the schedule, which is there's probably some truth to that. I think he did have some kind of guarantee to get something on the air after he left.
So just in the first episode, when they hire her, once the girlfriends get over it the first time, and then she's going to take a shower, she forgot her shampoo, and she can't open the bathroom door, and the guys end up locked in there with her, and then she ends up on the balcony, and her towel falls off, and she's behind a bush, and it's just, again, like one episode of a sitcom about two dudes who live together.
Yeah.
Or if they hire a maid as a guest star.
Yes.
That would work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or a movie, maybe.
Right. You're right.
Something finite.
And it's very low stakes titillation too, because nothing's really happening. So it's like, oh, just the fact that she's there in her towel is supposed to be funny. That's it. It's like even in 1983, it's almost like, haven't we moved past this where that alone shouldn't be enough to carry an episode?
Right.
Like maybe like 10 years earlier it would have been, but now it just seems like it seems kind of retrograde, just in the fact that there's just not much to it.
Yeah, and the execution of the sort of farce is not even Three's Company level.
Exactly. Like, and the advertising is emphasizing Terry Copeland. You got like I think some Jack Davis-esque artwork.
Yes.
So they were thinking that she would be like a breakout star, and I guess it didn't happen, but there was enough there to get it somehow revived and first run syndication years later.
And she's fine at playing that role, that sort of Marilyn Monroe, Judy Holliday,
I mean,
kind of thing. The breathy, maybe dumb blonde,
and the rest of the cast is good too.
Yeah,
like Matt McCoy is very good at that sort of, like, you could see him growing into that straight man leading the show thing, and then Tom Viller, he's interesting.
Yeah.
Like, he's an interesting performer, and I kind of liked watching him.
Right. Like, I couldn't quite get a beat on what his character... Like, at first he seemed like a dumb guy, and then very quickly it seemed more like he was, like, just like a weirdo. Yeah,
I think they were trying to moderate all this through as the show went on, because that first episode, I think even the other episode I saw was not too much later in that season, but it seemed like they were stamping down, like the stuff we're talking about, like the tension stuff, it seemed like they'd almost given up on it. And they were just doing episodes like more of a standard, like, friendship comedy kind of thing.
I mean, that seems like what it would have to be at some point.
Right. So I would say not as bad as what critics, assumed it was going to be, but not worth the 48 episodes it got. It got 1 star from Harry and Wally, and I can see why, but it's not terrible. The way it was promoted and the way it seemed like they got what they were asking for, I think NBC got what was asking for it, because it did promote it, I think, as something different than what it actually was.
And also that they put it on with Cheers and Hill Street Blues.
That's an excellent point. Yes. Yeah.
And whatever was, I don't know what was on it.
I think maybe Give Me a Break still at that time.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, Give Me a Break and Mama's Family.
Okay, well.
Leading into We Got It Made. So
We Got It Made is the bridge into Cheers.
Yeah, so NBC had some work to do,
Yeah. Not quite must-see TV yet.
No. But, I mean, they're kind of like probably getting maybe younger female demographics, but not exactly on the level of, like, Family Ties and St. Elsewhere and Cheers.
Right. Now, Bay City Blues
this is interesting.
The baseball show from Bochco and Jeffrey Lewis, not the actor. And again, it seems like NBC and Bochco trying to recreate Hill Street Blues. Mm-hmm. I mean, it has the word blues in the title, for
Yes, that's right.
About a AA minor league baseball team. It took whatever the episode I watched. I don't know if that was the pilot, or it said episode 1, but I don't know if it really was episode.
I think maybe
it was like the one after the pilot.
I had 2 episodes in there, and one of them is mislabeled or misnumbered, I think.
Okay, because it definitely seemed just dropping you in.
Yeah, I think it was the first episode.
Okay, but a good cast. Of course, a lot of Bochco regulars, Ken Olin and Dennis Franz and Peter Jurassic and
Michael Norrie.
Yeah.
And some other familiar face, Michelle Green.
Yeah, Michelle Green, who went on to LA Law. And
Pat
Corley.
Yeah, a young Sharon Stone.
Larry Flash Jenkins.
Yeah.
But to me, everything that was wrong about it was the stuff that was right about Hill Street Blues.
Oh, interesting. Okay, let's explain more about that.
Or not everything, but just how grimy it was.
Yeah.
It was like, it's double A, and a lot of these people are like stuck in double A. Like I think Ken Oland's character and another guy, the implication is that they're just kind of stuck there.
Yeah.
And the Michael Norrie's manager, people keep bringing that up, and that he's sort of like not, there's a reason you're in double A.
Yeah.
Which he reveals at the end of the episode, or at least part of it. But it's just, I don't know that I like watching it. I was like, I don't want to spend more time here. It's like
interesting, yeah.
Another thing that worked, like Bull Durham, for 2 hours or whatever Bull Durham is. That's great. But spend every week at this dive baseball team, and like the guy who's married to Sharon Stone's character is wetting the bed, and just like classic weirdo, or not weird, but Botchko excessiveness.
That stood out that really stood out to me. As soon as they had that conversation, I was like, this is like, it just felt like, okay, this is the shock value moment that's going to get people talking. Yeah. And it came off as very phony to me.
Right. And those characters are like way down the lineup, so to speak.
Right.
Ken Oland's character is a jerk. Backfires on him, but it's like I enjoyed, of course, Dennis Franz playing a sleazy coach.
Yeah, he seemed to be having a ball, didn't he?
Yes.
It seemed like, if you think Sipowicz was made for him, I'm not going to argue, but it seemed like this one was written for him too. Yeah. I mean, he's totally having a blast with it. But it also feels a little phony because there's this whole scene where he's talking about, like, how to doctor a baseball.
Right, yeah.
Various bodily fluids you can use. Yeah. And it's kind of funny, but again, it seems like, okay, it just seems contrived. Like, okay, this is going to get people, for non-baseball fans, this is going to stand out, and we're just going to do this big thing, and it's going to be like, and it's going to disgust people, but it's going to get them talking. And it's funny because you're absolutely right. Nowadays, I think Double A, often like a lot of the best prospects, will actually go from Double A right to the majors. It's more of a jumping ground, I think, than it was years ago. So like the lower aspect of it, because you had Triple A over it, I think that was more pronounced then. Now it's not so much. I think a lot of times, like, sort of the lifers will be parked at like maybe Triple A or something. There's maybe some different dynamics. But
did you get the impression this was associated with a team, or was it an independent, quasi-independent?
I got the impression they were hedging their bets with it. Like there was a few things where they would have an opportunity to establish that, and they didn't. And it seemed like they were trying to establish them as an independent team. Yeah, like they were not affiliated with a major league club.
Player gets bought, his contract gets bought to go to St. Louis. Yeah. But is that the Cardinals? Is it?
Yeah. They don't make it sound like it's their parent club. They make it sound like it's just one of the teams that, Yeah. I mean, that's something that maybe it's not a huge deal, but like, again, it kind of points out the problem of having like a show built around baseball. Yeah. And there's a lot of baseball in this. Yeah. And it's like, is there much of an audience for it? I mean, it's like we talked about, or what you saw, what I wanted to see Ball 4. Yeah. There's been some baseball shows recently. They don't work.
Right. And did they show them on the road at all, or is it always home base?
Yeah, yeah.
The fact that they have all these, they have wives and girlfriends, and Michael Norrie's getting involved with Kelly Harmon, who's I couldn't quite figure out like she's married to Kevin McCarthy.
Unlike in Exo-Man, this is Kevin McCarthy.
Yes, in one scene. Yeah. And I couldn't quite, is he just a friend of the team, or is he, because Pat Corley's the owner, right? Yeah. And he's maybe going to lose the team. Yeah. But it's, again, I think, a movie or maybe a mini series would have been okay.
They set up a lot of threads, and me as a baseball fan, yeah, I would be interested in the overall premise. But yeah, I kind of shared a lot of your feelings on this. And I remember, I think actually the videos that I put in the playlist are from ESPN Classic Rares. So I remember watching some of this when it was on ESPN Classic years ago, and that's the only time I remember anybody rerunning
and this
it.
show,
TV Land or somebody showed it too, I believe.
This show was so edgy that ESPN Classic 20 years later bleeped it.
Yeah.
Who knows what they said?
I do think of the shows we mentioned, Bay City Blues was, it only lasted 8 episodes. Ratings went down like every week. It just did not work at all. People turned out in droves on this one. I mean, I see the effort, and maybe this could have developed into something, but it just didn't have any audience appeal, and I think you articulate a lot of the good reasons why it didn't.
I sound like I'm passionately against this show. It just was like...
Yeah, well...
These things were standing out to me.
I think you've seen why it didn't work pretty much right away, and it makes sense. Yeah, it wasn't like you kind of you think Stephen Bochco and an interesting premise in a cast, and you think, well, maybe you kind of want it to be like a hidden gem of some kind, and it's really not the way it turned out.
Yeah, and again, it feels like another thing that would be hard to sustain.
I agree.
Now, I guess the last one we have is...
Well, we've got 2 of them, actually. Okay. 2 left. We got Manimal.
Oh, Manimal. Yes. How did I forget Manimal?
We don't want to forget Manimal. Now, let me tell you something here. One of the other, I forgot to mention this, but we've had talk about Manimal on our Facebook group before.
Yes,
So
yes.
to any of you, consider this we're looking at Manimal for now. I'm not saying we're not going to do a full episode of Manimal.
Right.
But this season, this is all we're going to talk about Manimal. And I didn't watch a whole episode of Manimal.
No.
I believe it's vigorously copyright protected by the good folks at Shout that put it on DVD. And I do not own that DVD. So I watched some clips and footage and
Yes. And
formed an opinion.
you did find a full episode that you put in our playlist, but it was in Spanish.
Yes.
Yes. Although, it's in Spanish, but it had beat it in the background. So the algorithm didn't get that.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's better than putting it like in Panther or in Dolphin or something
Yes.
like that.
Right, yeah.
Maybe it would be easier for me to understand, but I did not watch a full episode of it. And
No.
I am curious. I would watch a full episode. And this is one, again, I remember it being promoted very heavily, and I remember it being on, but I don't
Yes.
think I watched it. I don't think I watched a whole episode as a kid, but I'm sure I saw parts of it.
I feel like I didn't. I'm surprised I didn't.
Yeah.
I was watching Mr. Smith. It was on right after,
Yeah. Yeah.
or not right after it, but
Same night, yeah.
maybe something else cool was on it.
Glenn Larson,
Yeah.
and
Guy turning into animals.
yeah, I mean that's pretty. So yeah, that's the big concept. A guy turning into animals.
Yeah.
But
What's that guy's name?
Simon McCorkindale. His name is high
Yeah,
concept.
that's the actor's name.
Exactly.
The character's name is just like Jack or something.
So Manimal was on against the new show Lottery on ABC and Dallas on CBS. So CBS had the Dukes of Hazzard, Dallas, and Falcon Crest on Fridays, and nobody was beating them this year.
Huh. I must have just gone to bed or something.
Well, and Manimal only lasted 8 episodes.
Yeah.
Plus, it had like a 90-minute pilot. And Manimal, by the way, got 1 star from Harry and Wally.
And has, there's a thing where Letterman called NBC to find out the status of Manimal.
Yes.
Yes.
We'll put that in the. I believe that's been posted by the official.
I think
some of that has been posted by the official.
It's
Letterman
definitely
channel.
been posted by Don Geller. And I think that's the show that in the Voyager sketch, that's the show that's going to.
Yes, I think you're right.
He's like, oh, Manimal. So that was definitely a butt of jokes. Too.
Yes, it played the vital role in giving Johnny Carson and David Letterman a show besides Mr. Smith to mock
On their
without
own
mercy
network.
for weeks. Yeah, and was it Melody Anderson from
Yes.
Flash Gordon?
Yeah. And the pilot, I think, has Glenn Turman, and then someone replaces him.
Okay.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah, so you got this core, and he's like a professor or like an expert in animal behavioral science or something like that.
Apparently has animals living in his house.
Yeah, and there's some element of like mysticism, like he's learned the secrets of transforming into.
Yeah, but very much like Automan. It's like
Yeah.
Glenn Larson, high concept, clearly expensive.
Yeah, yeah. That you say that though, because and you're absolutely right. But a couple of the things I read talked about, like I think maybe it was TV Guide again making some snide comments about like how and what they'd seen. Like a lot of the transformations were conveniently like in dark alleys, or
Yeah.
implying that they were doing things to avoid exposing the effects.
Right, and I'm sure they repeated, they limited the animals to the ones they had either footage of or they'd just cut and he would be a wolf or something.
Yeah.
But the Black Panther seems to be the main one.
Yeah.
And a hawk, I think.
Well, I believe there was an animal strike just before production that threatened the whole series.
Right.
They were going to go with non-union animal labor for a while, but
Oh, yeah. You see those effects in for 1983 TV, and it's done by the venerable Stan Winston. And, they're pretty good for 1983.
yeah.
And they're kind of gross.
Yeah. I'll put it this way. Like, if you're interested in a show about a guy transforming into animals, I don't think you're going to be disappointed by the transformations in this.
No.
If anything, you might want to see it happen more often, like kind of like why we only get to see the Hulk twice an episode. But
Right, yeah. Although it kind of jumping through that pilot episode, it did seem like there was maybe not a good amount of transformations on screen, but a lot of time where Manimal was an animal and not a man.
Yes. Right.
I guess he's always a manimal. When he's a man, he's also animal. When he's an animal, he's also man inside.
That's some high concept right there. Yes.
Yeah. I'm sure Glenn Larson had that exact conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what sold it. Yeah, this one didn't work.
Plus it was Animal Night on NBC.
Yeah, that's right.
A lot of animal puppets around.
Yeah.
Maybe Stan Winston made Mr. Smith too. Or maybe
maybe.
Rick Baker did that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
These guys probably don't want their name anywhere near that show.
No.
Doing them a disservice.
So last we saved Jennifer slept here for last. which is probably the best show.
I agree, which is why I was stunned to see that Harry and Wally, who I often agree with, gave it 1 star. It had 13 episodes, and in their description of it, they said something which it almost indicates that they only watched like the pilot.
Yeah.
And you wonder, like, they have like reviews of like every show in history here, and you wonder sometimes how much did they actually watch. Mm-hmm. Because one sentence stands out. They're talking about how it doesn't work, and they say, you keep expecting Jennifer to seduce the poor kid. It's like, no, I don't get that at all.
No.
I think they distance themselves from that very quickly, actually.
Make you see the kid wanting her to.
And even that, I think they move away from.
Yeah.
I think they missed the boat on this one. I think it's good. And to mention, one of our friends, Gino, I actually asked him if he'd like to say a little bit about Jennifer Slept Here, because he's a big fan of the show. And I want to thank him for listening, and also for kind of getting it in my head. And that kind of helped stimulate this idea, because I started watching episodes. They're all available on YouTube. Pretty easy to find, too. So you can watch them for yourself in decent quality. And if you don't mind, I'd like to take a minute or two to read what Gino wrote about the show. Hello, Rick and Mike, and thank you for providing me the opportunity to spotlight Jennifer Slept Here, which is one of the more unheralded programs from the early 1980s. The premise is quite ridiculous, with It's a Living's Anne Gillian's Jennifer Farrell, a once prominent starlet, expiring upon her pursuit of an ice cream truck. The Elliott family, consisting of Father George, Brandon Maggart, Mother Susan, the late great Georgia Engel, daughter Marilyn, Maya Ackerling, and son Joey, John P. Navin Jr., exporting from New York to move into Farrell's former home in California. Gillian and her male lead Navin are an absolute delight to watch. Their chemistry is of the surefire variety. It is fun watching Navin play straight man to the often playfully antagonistic Gillian, who possessed supreme comic timing. The series plays out like an updated 1980s version of Thorne Smith's Topper, with the ghostly Farrell's supernatural prowess the constant butt of the joke, and Joey's annoyance at Farrell's interference in his life generated some genuine laughs. Farrell often served as a surrogate mother to the teenage Joey during the course of the series run, when Joey's own mother proved distant. Farrell was quite protective of Joey, teaching him how to outsmart bullies, build up the courage to date, and she saved him from a serious predicament when his home became the center of a gambling ring. However, the series wasn't always a laugh fest, and it handled serious subjects remarkably well. The best episode of the series for me is the 11th episode, The Moving Life with Grandfather, which aired on April 28, 1984. The episode sees Joey's grandfather, a toy manufacturer named Barney, Milo O'Shea, come to visit, and it seems the entire family hasn't the time to devote to him. Upon experimenting with one of his toys in the attic, Barney dies, and Joey takes the news hard. He pleads with Jennifer to bring Barney back. However, she is unable to do so. She convinces Joey that it would be therapeutic to talk to Barney as if he were there, and it provides Joey some solace as his father walks in and the two share an emotional moment. It was refreshing to see this scenario written realistically instead of providing Joey the Hollywood ending of being able to converse with his grandfather once more. This episode hit close to home as I lost my father prematurely over 20 years ago when I was only 6 years old, and how I wish I could have had that opportunity to speak with him once more. I've shared many an emotional moment with my mother over the loss of my father, and this episode brought me to tears. The program wasn't always a winner. Some of the characters were flat in writing and execution, particularly Ackerling's character, as well as Joey's stereotypical best friend Mark, Glenn Scarpelli. Additionally, the special effects were subpar, and the program felt quite claustrophobic at times, being mainly set within the house. However, the series did boast some great guest stars, such as Monty Hall, and especially the late great Debbie Reynolds as Jennifer's mother. As mentioned before, Navin and Gillian work wonderfully together, and it's a shame the program didn't get more attention or additional seasons ordered, as it would have been interesting to see their relationship blossom. Indeed, the series was ripped apart by critics upon original airing, and there has been no interest in releasing the series on home media, nor an interest in revising the concept. Anne Gillian was a remarkable comedic talent, as well as a radiant beauty, and this series certainly made a fan out of me. It's a shame that John P. Navin Jr. never went on to greater fame, as he made for a decent teen lead, and it would have been great to see him hone his craft as the series progressed. All told, Jennifer Slept Here, while not a groundbreaking or earth-shattering sitcom, was nonetheless an entertaining watch, and one that I would recommend to anyone in search of something that has been forgotten by time. I want to thank both Rick Brooks and Michael Kogel for providing me the opportunity to discuss this program, and if anybody wishes to follow my endeavors, please follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/officialginocuddy, on Instagram at officialginocuddy, and Twitter at officialginoc. Additionally, you may follow my internet reviews of old westerns at www.cinema-craze.com/blog/category/western-wednesdays, and seek out my YouTube channel where I preserve classic films forgotten by the sands of time, Gino's House of Rare Films. Thanks again, Rick and Mike. Have an excellent show and a great night ahead. Thanks again, Gino, for sharing that with us, and I'll put those links in our show notes too, so you can see them there on the webpage and not have to thanks again, Gino. Appreciate it.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, it is.
We should also mention that listener Ian, when he had sent us a bunch of DVDs, there were Jennifer Slept Here DVDs that didn't end up working, but
that's right.
So it was on our radar before.
Yes, that's right. Good point.
Yeah.
And I've happened to have seen all the episodes of this show now, and I kind of like it. And as Gino says, not every episode is an instant classic, but they're going for something. They're just like the general aspect of it, the general atmosphere just seems a little bit better than some of the other stuff we talked about.
So I did watch the grandfather episode, which is it's quite good.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, to see that kind of treatment of grief
Yeah.
on a sitcom from the 80s is I just to slow down and let that happen at the end was really impressed me.
Yeah, and it's admirable too because it's actually like using its high concept premise, the fact of you got a 14-year-old living with a ghost, and actually okay, instead of just having stories where everybody thinks he's crazy, let's do an episode where we explore what death is. We've done some stories about about these other things, but this is actually okay. Let's do what we can and tell an actual serious story, but still have jokes in it. I thought it worked pretty well.
Yeah. So Ann Gillian, John P. Navin, of course, was on one of our Silver Spoons episodes.
That's right. Yes.
Georgia Engel from Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Right.
Is his mom, a couple other people.
Yeah.
I recognize his dad.
Gino mentioned the dad's name.
And this, as the grandfather, featured Miles O'Shea and his amazing eyebrows.
Yeah. Those are big league. Those aren't AA eyebrows. Those
By the
are
way,
major league
I
eyebrows.
just want to say right here, I feel like nothing against these shows, but none of these should qualify for baddies.
I'll go along with that. I agree.
Because between his eyebrows and Sam Elliott's mustache, it would be a runaway train.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Hopefully one day we'll have a chance to reward Sam Elliott's mustache.
Yes, I agree that the competitive baddies should not include these because they're not. This is kind of a different kind of episode.
Yeah, but very effective. And the impression I got from that episode is that maybe the parents don't have a lot of time for him, the kid, and so she's sort of a kind of a mentor.
Yeah.
But she's an actress who she died in the house. Is that right? Or
she was hit by like a truck or something.
okay,
I think.
yeah.
But she lived there.
Yes,
she slept.
She slept
there. I want to sing the song now. Let's start going. A Joe Scarberry song, by the way.
Yes, and was she was like in the a golden age actress or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I forget the actual era. Like more of an old Hollywood.
Yeah, which suits Ann Gillian.
Yeah. I think Ann Gillian's great, and and it was nice watching this and I had watched like some It's a Living, recently, and she stands out on that show, and she stands out on this too. She's very charismatic, and you can see, again, I get the premise here and thinking, okay, we got a star Ann Gillian who can do this, and it took them a while, I think, to find John P. Navin Jr.
Yeah,
but he's great.
Yeah.
You got Glenn Scarpelli. He's kind of like the annoying kid. He's like sort of everything. Like you fear that like the John P. Navin character will be just totally hormone driven and shallow.
Wait, Glenn Scarpelli's the annoying kid?
Yeah.
But this episode, my memory of him on One Day at a Time is he was kind of a dork.
Yeah.
And now he's like a cool dork.
Yeah,
he's still a dork.
He's kind of like the dork the sidekick of the dork.
Yeah.
Like the dorky sidekick, in a
he's
teen
a guy
movie.
trying to be cool.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Get the ladies and all that kind of.
Yes. Just I think just shallow,
Yes.
Whereas there's not much to him. Whereas the John P. Navin character has actual emotions and is grappling with stuff and thinks about things and
right. Yeah.
he's the main character. But yeah, I think even I really like the theme song. It's like a get a Joey Scarberry song, and it's just kind of like I don't know. The whole thing has kind of a classier veneer than I expected.
Yes, and the credits are all like pencil drawings.
And maybe it doesn't. I think it was headed in the right direction. Yeah, for sure.
And see, and that's a show. Even though it is high concept, but I think you could sustain that because, like, if he gets too old, 7 different family move in.
Yeah,
started again. Maybe have a girl this time. There's a way you could make that go for a while.
Now there's two Larrys that produced this show.
Yes,
can't remember their names.
The 2 Larrys.
Yeah, but I believe this is an example in the Sweeps book. I think this is the show where somebody with the network has reservations about where they go from there. And the guy, like one of them, like wrote down or spent a night and typed out like 3 or 4 different other story ideas. And then they were like, okay, but they wanted proof that it could go. And they actually had those stories that backs up what you're saying there. And
or, eventually maybe the whole family can see her.
Yeah. Well, glad you mentioned that because normally I'm annoyed. This has probably come up before. I'm very annoyed by TV shows and movies where one character can see something that's obvious, but the others can't. Yeah. Now, in this case, they kind of make it do a special case, and they do a little bit of that. Like, as much as I like Abbott and Costello, it always annoys me when, like, Abbott never sees the ghost that Costello can only see.
Right, yeah.
It goes on too long. It's like, come on, enough of this. And this is a whole show built around that. Yeah. It always bothered me in, like, I Dream of Jeannie for a while, and Bewitched and those kind of things. So I think it's a compliment to the show that I enjoyed it despite that thing. And that, to me, that aspect is not so annoying in this one.
Yeah, occasionally people think he's crazy.
But. Yeah.
But then the grandfather, that's really the way they handle that too. Like and he dies in an explosion in their house.
Yeah.
That he causes because he's a wacky inventor.
And it's set up very well, actually, because he's
And
doing
then
minor incidents before that.
he's just sort of reacting, and I think she says something, and he responds, and she realizes
Yeah,
that if he's responding, that means he's dead.
right. He like recognizes her.
Yeah,
Like, hey, aren't you
because
dead?
he'd seen her in a movie. Yeah,
Yeah. And she's like, guess what we have in common?
Yeah.
And the way she says it's kind of like bittersweet the way she said it, but it's very well done. I mean,
But then she eases him into, like, if someone like that is there to help you out when you die, it's a little, that would be comforting, I guess.
yeah, and afterwards, the characters in the show ask the questions that you would ask based on the concept, because he wants to bring he wants to talk to his grandfather, and he assumes that he can talk to him.
Yeah.
She's like, no, that's not how it works.
Right.
And like he learns from that, and they're saying something about it, and kind of appreciating what you have while you can, and again, like done in a tasteful way, but sort of responding kind of what's been covered on the show itself and taking it like in a little slightly different direction.
Yeah. So my other question was just because you've seen them all. Like, are there rules about the physical interaction? Because it seems like, I mean, she's able to hold his hand, and she apparently can manipulate stuff because she hangs up a
Right.
laundry clothesline
Right.
in his room.
And there's like one scene early in this where the grandfather, I think before he's dead,
He
right?
kind of, yeah.
He feels something.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember like if they've actually established rules, but I think they don't have other people like she doesn't interact with other people,
Yeah.
but she can apparently has some control
Physical,
over
yeah.
phasing or whatever. I don't know how that works.
And then she apparently fixes the whole attic
Yeah.
magically or something. I
Yeah.
don't know. Didn't follow all that. But it seems like there's some quality here.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know how much NBC believed in it though.
Yeah.
And they didn't give it much time, and I think it was dead in the water.
Well.
Because Mr. Smith didn't do well.
Yeah.
So, but this is the one I think deserves something better. And although it doesn't get as much attention as some of these other like notorious flops, I think this is the one that shows, okay, this is the kind of show that NBC maybe could have nurtured. And it does kind of make you wonder what if. I mean, I'm not saying it could have been like a hit on the level of Family Ties,
Right.
but some of these shows like Family Ties and Cheers were like super low in the ratings, but maybe a year earlier, if this had gotten on under a different circumstance, it could have gotten more time. In this case, though, they just like killed this whole Friday night lineup because nothing was working.
I think, yeah, if they could have put it on maybe with Family Ties or with Facts of Life or something like that.
Like an established show.
Yeah, that's tonally more consistent with it than
Yeah.
Mr. Smith, which isn't tonally consistent with anything.
Yeah. No, that's another great point. I think really the show deserved to be like maybe it was worthy of getting a shot with like another show, a better show than Mr. Smith, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, I enjoyed that.
Well, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I do. I was talking about what NBC thought, and how they promoted the things.
Oh, yeah.
And I believe this man has been on Ian's, you mentioned our friend of the show, Ian, his podcast. Joel Thurm was the head of casting at NBC at the time. And this is kind of like late in the book, and they're kind of doing like a postmortem and explaining how the season turned out. And so Joel Thurm here pretty much goes through and talks about the shows, and his take on it. And I thought this was kind of interesting. Like they had all aired. This is not the end of the season, but they had all aired, and it says, and Thurm wasn't too pleased with what he'd seen. So here's what he says. This is a direct quote here. Yellow Rose, the first 3 episodes were, shall we say, less than interesting. They were slow, and the focus was on outside characters. I wanted to see more of our people, and the 2 producers just were not compatible. And he talks about the producers a little bit, and he says, we've lost Susan Onspach, who had a real problem with Michael Zinberg, one of the producers. Susan is a little not neurotic. A lot of actresses are a little neurotic, but Susan needs extra attention. After Michael left, she was asked back, but it was too late. Also, the show is aggressively macho. I don't know of any reason why women would watch it. But it's salvageable. So is We Got It Made. It's one of our highest rated comedies, but just imagine if it was good. Continues, Boone has a problem. In the pilot, I saw Boone as a rebel, a stronger character, and now all of a sudden he's a saint. The show is very, very soft, and I think they should have cheated a little on their music and not been so authentic. Tried a little Stray Cats kind of thing, more contemporary. They softened the daughter, they took sex away from her. I think all those things are mistakes. This show hasn't done Tom Bird any good because his character's so soft. Bay City Blues has the problem of keeping track of who is who. There are so many similar characters. And it's not in a life and death situation like a cop or medical show. It's also doubtful whether women are really watching the show since it deals with baseball. When St. Elsewhere went on the air, there was a lot of loose time, breathing time. They shut themselves down and cast 3 actors and changed directors. Bay City hasn't had the chance to do that. Mr. Smith, we all should have realized that to have one of those masks that really works, like E.T. or Yoda, it costs several $1,000,000. It's not easy to get all those expressions and make them lovable. Maybe they'll add a few more people so the ape doesn't have to be center stage all the time. The last couple of shows of Jennifer Slept Here have been very funny. I don't want to say it's a silly show, but it is a silly show. They're still finding their characters and finding out what works. Another show that's having problems with execution is Manimal. What got lost lost there is humor and the relationship between the male and female leads. If you don't chuckle a little bit while you watch that show, it just isn't going to work. Rousters, I think, is never going to work. We just all believe that Steve Cannell knew something that everybody else didn't after he hit so big with A-Team. Another one that's not working is Love and Honor. There's no center to it. I don't think Love and Honor ever knew what Love and Honor was. And then he kind of closes by saying, the mood at the network is pretty grim. After the beginning of this 1983 season, all the shows are tanking.
He said that on the record in an interview?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he said that with the just an interview for this book, I guess, just talking with these guys. Yeah. So, but as we mentioned, though, there was some hit and a couple other shows we didn't mention that were coming in January 1984. You had Night Court, like almost right at the beginning. Mm-hmm. The New Show with Lorne Michaels. Now, that did not work. That was another January 84 show. Practical Jokes and Bloopers, which became a hit.
Yeah.
And one more show we didn't mention that also premiered in early 1984, Riptide.
Oh, yeah.
So you had these shows, kind of like they're getting there. And Cheers is building an audience in the summer. Cheers built up against reruns, and it was steadily building an audience. It got attention with the Emmys and everything. So there were signs for optimism, but they needed some new shows.
And see, Riptide, simple concept.
Yeah.
3 dudes with a helicopter and a robot solving crimes.
That's right.
I think that's what it was.
Yeah.
2 guys you recognize from lots of other TV shows and a nerd.
And a guy named Thom. Tom with THOM. Isn't that who it is on that?
The actor or the character?
The actor, yeah.
It's been a long time since I've seen Riptide.
Well, and some of these shows we might be in future seasons. Maybe we'll revisit some of these. But so NBC ended the season in 3rd place. Seemingly, maybe you could argue it took a step backwards in some ways. 9 new shows, 9 flops, but there were some things to build on, and they needed a couple more big hits, and they would get them. Boy, they had some waiting to get there, though. I mean, and they had some pains for sure.
Yeah.
And it's funny, too, because A-Team, which is their clear number 1 hit right now, that was very meteoric rise, but didn't have much staying power.
Right.
After a couple seasons, it was already declining.
Yeah.
And yet, at the time, they're thinking, they're probably thinking that we could build around this show for like 5 years, at least.
Again, makes you question the high concept idea.
Yeah.
Is it really the place for high concept ideas?
Yeah, I don't know.
All right. Well, this is really interesting.
Yeah. And thanks again to the people we mentioned and everybody in the Facebook group. Hope you guys and everybody else out there listening enjoys this kind of unique episode. Mm-hmm. And tell us what you think. Which of these shows do you like? We'll put the clips that we talked about. We'll make sure that we put them in the playlist. And some of the shows we mentioned are easy to find. You're not going to need our help to find some of these, but we'll put some of the promotional materials and commercials and stuff like that. Yeah. So you can do a deep dive if you like to, like we did.
That's right. And you can BOTNS there.
Oh, I like that. This episode brought to you by Hoyt Axton's Stationary Carnival. This episode also brought to you by Ed Period Hamburgers. Bring your coveted 2 to 11-year-old demographic for the Mr. Smith Kids Meal. Stay for the biting political commentary jalapeno burger. This episode also brought to you by NBC. Be there. Please. Please be there. Please. Join us next time for another exciting episode of Battle of the Network shows. Learn more, leave feedback, and suggest future episodes at battleofthenetworkshows.com. Follow us on Twitter at BatNetShows and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Battle of the Network Shows.